Welcome to Nixon's the One. Today's episode is about how Richard Nixon organized his 1968 campaign to win the presidency. I'm Merrick Masters, a professor of business emeritus, commentator, podcaster, and author. You can find me at my YouTube channel, Masters on Business, Labor, and Politics, at Merrick Masters. Today is January the 9th, 2026. Today actually is Richard Nixon's birthday. If he were alive, he would be 112 years old. The 1960 campaign, in which Richard Nixon lost to John F. Kennedy, had a lack of structure and clear lines of authority. Nixon rejected a proposal that was made to him in the spring of 1960 to establish a plans board with diffuse lines of authority and substitute himself as the de facto campaign manager and chief of staff, which created a lot of problems with how his campaign was ultimately managed throughout the general election in 1960. Nixon's 1968 campaign evolved through 5 major phases, beginning long before he announced his candidacy in 1965, actually. By May 1968, after Nixon had won all the primaries, the campaign took on a distinctive hierarchical organization which kept Nixon firmly in control, but carefully managed his time through the ubiquitous presence of H.R. Haldeman, his chief of staff, and who was the campaign manager of his 1962 campaign for governor and also the tour director of his 1960 campaign. Here is a breakdown of the general election budget for the Nixon-Agnew campaign, which spent about $24 million in August through November of 1968. This was a record amount at that time, on top of the roughly $10 million that had spent in the primary election through various campaign units, including Nixon for president. The leaders in the 1968 Nixon campaign obviously included himself, John Mitchell, H.R. Haldeman, and Maurice Stans. It was a very lean and disciplined and very tough organization. The basic structure of the campaign revolved around 3 principles, apart from Nixon himself: John Mitchell, the overall campaign manager; H.R. Haldeman, the chief of staff; Maurice Stans, who was finance chair. Stans ran the finance operation from A to Z. Haldeman had broad authority. Basically, all matters involving Richard Nixon, including family and Richard Nixon's personal secretary, Rosemary Woods, were under the jurisdiction of Haldeman, as were the schedule, the tour, advance and rally, personnel, advertising, media, public relations, communications, research and writers, the New York office that handled the mail under the operational authority of Nixon's brother, Ed Nixon, security and expediters, as well as medical staff. Haldeman formally came on board on June 1, but before that, in January of 1968, he was identified by the then political director of the campaign, Robert Ellsworth, that Haldeman was to take charge of planning for the convention. A checklist of convention preparation details the precision with which planning took place. In fact, an extremely detailed manual was put together in late 1967 to guide the convention planning. Haldeman came full-time, as I mentioned, officially to the campaign on June 1, 1968. Excuse me. He resigned from the J. Walter Thompson Company, where he was vice president of advertising, on June 1, 1, 1968. The letter was actually not submitted until July 17, 1968. Haldeman began shortly after he took on control of the staff, personal staff, and other responsibilities in early June by holding a staff meeting with Nixon's campaign officialdom on June the 2nd, 1968. Nixon was at this campaign event, and the staff meeting's agenda is outlined here. Nixon was to provide an outline of the campaign plan in brief, and then solicit the advice of his staff, including the campaign manager and finance director and chief of staff Haldeman. The agenda included Nixon's schedule, campaign organization, advertising, issue development, and general strategy. Haldeman's sphere of responsibility in this diagram he drafted of it included everything from major functions such as research and communications to handling baggage and laundry. The Nixon campaign budget in the primary phase, which included mainly April through the convention in August, was again divided into divisions, and here are the spending amounts allocated by the divisions over this time period. This includes the Nixon for President April through August candidate support budget, basically while Haldeman was on staff. He came on board and got some money in May, but officially joined on June the 1st. You can see the other people on his staff and the amount they were allocated on a monthly basis during that time period. His campaign support staff included major figures such as Pat Buchanan, Ray Price, Bill Safire. H.R. Haldeman notes on the campaign showed how he seriously approached managing Nixon's time. He said, among other things, that in order to increase the fullest and most effective use of RN's time, and so that he can be readily available to those needing to meet with him directly, it is necessary to refine and formalize some procedures. So it was very carefully controlled how you would get access to Nixon and how his time would be divided. Nixon would determine how his time would be divided between speech preparation, personal appearances, personal appointments, phone calls, staff meetings, and major decision making. Here are the individuals assigned with various aspects of Nixon's scheduling. These are some of the things that evolved from this general framework that Haldeman designed to run the campaign. Nixon's campaign evolved in the 1960s from a small group of ad hoc advisors and financiers to a top-heavy hierarchical structure that was lean but efficient. Nixon learned from 1960 the painful lesson of delegating authority and giving key staff broad areas of responsibility. For the post-primary period of the campaign, late May through November 5th, Haldeman was the fulcrum. Nixon's campaign revolved around Haldeman's media-centric strategy. Haldeman had an advertising background, was very interested in this. That freed up Nixon's time to focus on issues and speeches. John Mitchell, as the campaign manager when brought on board, ran a very tight ship and did not bring matters to Nixon unless needed. The same applied with Stans, who held the area of responsibility in finance, fundraising. Information flowed on a need-to-know basis. Complainers, non-complayers, and problematic personalities were unwelcome to the campaign. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Stay tuned for more on Nixon's the One, which is based on a book I'm writing on Nixon's comeback in the 1960s. Thank you and have a good day.